I'm here with my husband because we want to support your work.
Hearing perspectives from not just Isaac, but everybody on staff has been amazing to see.
The thing I really appreciate about Tangle is that they take like what might be the most substantial arguments, and then they filter all the crap out. Can I say that on TV?
Say crap.
Okay.
We're excited to be here together. Ready for the event?
I am ready for the event. Yeah, let's go.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here with you tonight. When we saw that this event was going to be held on Game 1 of the World Series and the Dodgers were going to be in it, we were worried that the game was going to be a distraction from this event. And then just before I came out, I looked at the score, and hopefully now we can be the distraction from what happened in that game. On to Game 2, on to Game 2. My name's Will Kaybeck. I'm Tangle's senior editor, and I am, thank you. I'm here to introduce Isaac Saul, who is more deserving of the applause. Isaac is Tangle's founder. He is our executive editor, and he'll be the moderator of tonight's discussion. And Isaac's story is, I think, at once unique, and it's also probably relatable to many people here and to millions of other Americans. If you've read Tangle or you're familiar with Tangle, you've probably heard Isaac tell his story. He grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is one of the most politically divided counties and areas in all of the country. And so growing up, Isaac was exposed to a lot of different views and a lot of different political debates. So that was his norm. But when Isaac became a political journalist, one of the things that he realized was that newsrooms and media outlets were not exposing their viewers to that kind of diversity in viewpoints and in ideology. And so when he started Tangle in 2018, that was the mission. He wanted to create a space where people of all political backgrounds could both see their views represented and also be challenged by views that they hadn't been exposed to before, that they didn't hold, and kind of create a space to engage with the best arguments on the big issues. And so when he started in 2018, he was also working a full-time job as a politics reporter. So he was pulling 16, 17, 18-hour days. He was working on Tangle in the morning, getting it out. He would go be a reporter for 10 hours. He'd come back. He'd work on the next day's newsletter. He did that for 2 years before he got Tangle to a place where he was able to do it on his own. And since that time, Tangle has become a diverse and award-winning media organization. Isaac's work has been cited in major publications like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Fox News. His writing has been featured in outlets like the Free Press and Persuasion and the Columbia Journalism Review. And Isaac is really the reason that we're all here today. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity he's provided at Tangle and the opportunity to be here with all of you. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tangle's founder and executive editor, Isaac Saul.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right. Good evening. Thank you guys for being here. Sorry about the Dodgers. Tough. I want to start by speaking plainly about where I think we are today, October 24th, 2025. When I look around the political arena, the candidates, the policies, the extremism, the AI slop, the punditry, the writing, the thinking, the not very deeply held principles, it feels to me like it's getting worse in basically every meaningful way. And I don't say that to be a cynic or to insist that we all throw our hands in the air and give up. The opposite, actually. I say that because acknowledging where we are, acknowledging that reality, to me, is a necessary first step to combat it. In the face of all this partisanship, this bitter hatred, half-baked talking points, ideological capture, and groupthink, I think there is actually quite a bit of reason for optimism. We all have a choice about what we want to put out into the world. As individuals, we can choose how we want to approach our own politics, whether we want to be open-minded and thoughtful or closed-minded and angry. As community members and friends, we can approach our political opponents with curiosity and care, or with cynicism and condemnation. And in my shoes, as a member of the media, We can try to feed our audience the narratives that affirm their biases, or we can try to expose them to a wide range of viewpoints. We do not do this at Tangle because both sides have equally good arguments on every issue, or because every debate is complicated, or because we are trying to boost centrist views. We do it because the big debates of our time today are often reduced to 20-second sound bites and misrepresented talking points. We do it because Americans are increasingly trapped inside echo chambers and bubbles that they need to be broken out of. We do it because fundamentally we think people, you guys, are smart enough to take in strong arguments from different perspectives and then make up your own minds. We also do it because we are living in an era where three things to me seem increasingly obvious. One, Americans who disagree politically spend less time talking and sharing space together now than ever before. Two, trust in the media is plummeting and it's only getting worse. And three, it's harder and harder to have conversations that hold any kind of nuance, especially in the political space. So to that end, I think tonight is an important night. I don't think this is going to reshape the future of the country, what we're going to do here tonight. But I do think that by being here this evening, you're doing the thing that we should all be doing. You're participating in a kind of political engagement that is above the partisan rancor, the AI slop, the extremism. By being here tonight, you are participating in something that represents a solution to these problems. There is a politically diverse group of people in this audience, in this room right now, together, sharing space. There is a politically diverse group of panelists about to come out onto this stage. We're going to talk about some big, controversial, important topics that I think are worthy of conversation and debate, and we're going to take your questions at the end of the evening. And I hope you are going to get to listen to a conversation between a few panelists that contains some layers of nuance on some challenging topics. To my delight, those panelists offer a wide range of experience and expertise. Joining us this evening are Alex Thompson, Anna Kasparian, and Kmele Foster. Alex is a reporter at Axios and the best-selling author of Original Sin, the book that rocked the political world earlier this year by detailing the cover-up surrounding President Joe Biden's mental fitness during the latter half of his term. Alex is one of the most well-sourced journalists in Washington, and he's been all over the story of two of California's most important politicians, Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom, who, by the way, both appear to be eyeing a 2028 presidential run. Anna is the executive producer and co-host of the Young Turks, and she is among the most popular hubs of political commentary in the United States. While she is widely considered a voice of the populist left from the outside, I think she's increasingly described herself as politically homeless. She's been publicly wrestling with her own evolving views on things like crime and homelessness. And she's talked a lot about how right here in California, as a lifelong California resident, that she's an outspoken critic of democratic policies in this very state. I got to interview Anna a little bit before tonight, and she's got a lot of really interesting views about the things that are happening right here, unpredictable views. And Kmele Foster, of course, is Tangle's own editor-at-large. He's the co-host of our Suspension of the Rules podcast, where I spend most of my time waiting for him to shut up so I can say something. He also hosts the Fifth Column podcast, a show where he and his co-host spend a lot of time criticizing the media coverage and all of its failures that we've experienced over the last 10 years. A once self-described libertarian, I can say this honestly about Kmele, I have a hard time labeling him or pegging him or predicting what he's going to think about any particular issue, and that is a trait that I frankly admire greatly. We are going to be discussing a few big topics that have dominated the news recently, all with deep ties to California: immigration, gerrymandering, and the 2028 election. Yes, there will be another election, believe it or not. And toward the end of the evening, we'll pause to take some audience questions, and then I'm going to send you guys off with some closing thoughts before you get out of here. So, thank you for being here. And with that, I would like to invite our panelists to the stage. Please give them a warm welcome. Alex Thompson, Anna Kasparian, and Kmele Foster. All right, thank you guys for being here. Okay, I want to start with immigration and some of the stuff that we've been seeing right here in California. So I think today maybe Portland and Chicago are kind of the focal points of the Trump administration's deportation efforts. But just a few months ago, it was California. We saw protests all over Los Angeles. In July, we saw massive immigration raids across the state. There were clashes with agents, law enforcement agents, the National Guard. Core to this issue, to me, seems to be the question of who the administration is choosing to target and the means that they're using. So I'd like to start here, and Anna, I'm going to start with you. Setting aside the National Guard deployments for now, I'm curious if you think President Trump is going too far in how he's conducting immigration enforcement actions here in California.
I do, and I think that he is intentionally going too far. He sort of operates based on the shock and awe. He operates based on kind of sending a message and scaring people. You know, as soon as he got elected, there's a reason why the flow of immigration from our southern border pretty much came to a halt. He didn't even really need to shut the border down. He basically communicated through his campaign that he was going to kind of rule with an iron fist when it came to the topic of immigration. Now, I think that the Biden administration, I want to be completely honest, mishandled immigration to a large degree. We had millions of people come into the country. There wasn't really a strategy or a plan in place to help some of the cities that were overwhelmed with migrants. And that led to backlash, blowback. You know, and so I think the outcome of the 2024 election was representative of the blowback I'm talking about. But now what we're seeing is this focus on using the immigration issue to almost retaliate against Trump's political opponents. And when you start from a place of political retaliation, you're not going to have a policy that's going to suit the best interests of the American people. So you're seeing these ICE raids happen with individuals who are, I mean, it seems like they have no training. You know, there's been a hiring spree with ICE, especially after they passed the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, and there were tens of, billions of dollars, pumped into immigration enforcement. And so I personally am not interested in seeing my tax dollars go toward violently and viciously detaining day laborers at Home Depot parking lots. At the same time, though, I do have a big problem with some of these blue cities and blue states, so-called sanctuary cities, sanctuary states, that I think went too far. So when you have the federal government reach out to you and say, hey, here's a detainer for an undocumented immigrant who's currently in prison because they've been convicted of a violent crime and we want to deport them once their sentence is over, why wouldn't democratic cities comply with that? And if you would comply with that, I would venture to say that maybe the Trump administration would be a little less vicious in the way that they're handling immigration enforcement in these jurisdictions. Maybe I'm being naive about that, but even if I'm being naive about that, I don't want to keep people who are here illegally committing violent crimes. They should be deported. It's that simple. That's the way I see it.
I guess, Kmele, I'll put it to you. I mean, how important do you think the methods are here? I mean, even if you agree with maybe Anna's assessment about the need for enforcement, does it matter whether the enforcement's happening in a way that you find palatable or not, or do you just want to see something like that done?
Well, I think it's certainly consequential how the enforcement is happening. I mean, the temperature is so hot right now. All of the response, the agitation, certainly the No Kings rally, it's hard to imagine it happening absent the tension that has been created because of the troop deployments, because of the ICE raids. So there's a great deal that the administration could do to tamp that down. They haven't done it. But I think Anna makes a really important point. There is almost certainly an opportunity to do some bridge building here. Democrats have to recognize at this point that there is an appetite for some greater immigration enforcement, at least as it compared to what the Biden administration was doing. And if they could work with the administration here, I do think that that might actually help to temper some of the craziness and insanity of the moment and take a cudgel away from the Trump administration. I think it's kind of a win-win for them if they find places where they can partner. An important point that has been made a couple of times now, that Barack Obama managed to deport a lot of people. He managed to do it without these incredible, incendiary ICE raids and tactics involving national federal forces essentially being deployed to American cities. That seems really important. And that seems to be a point that is lost on both the Trump administration and its critics. And I think that doing more to actually try and achieve something without everything being completely inflamed would be to everyone's advantage. Both the Trump administration and Democrats would benefit from that.
Well, I can tell you, someone that lives in D.C., no bridges are being built at all. And also, how dare you? There was still an inning left in the Dodgers game, and you apologize. I know it was 11-4, but there was still potential there. The thing is, from Donald Trump's perspective, despite the backlash from the left, Donald Trump was not shy about saying that he was going to have the biggest deportation raid in American history. He said it all the time. I was at the Madison Square Garden rally in October, 2 weeks before Election Day, where the entire crowd was, chanting, "Send them back." And that was a familiar chant at every Trump rally. And, they came in and they said, we're going to prioritize criminals. But what has been very clear is that just because you prioritize it, criminals, they basically have shifted from to say, if you are here illegally, makes you a criminal, and that's enough. Mm-hmm. And that's why you get people that have been here for several decades being swept up in these raids, and why you also see, a level of fear in those communities that you were talking about, which is intentional. Yep. The other thing I would say that is something really to watch is that the people that Donald Trump has entrusted power to execute this, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem and her chief of staff, or de facto chief of staff, Corey Lewandowski, who are also reportedly been in a relationship. He
can't help himself. The reporter, yeah.
Is that true?
Read the New York Magazine cover story about that dynamic. And Corey Lewandowski has, according to many people that have worked with him, has a very loose relationship with ethics just in general. And
I can believe that.
And this is going to be something to really watch, because a lot of people in Trump's orbit didn't respect Kristi Noem, wanted to give her something like Interior Secretary beforehand. She and Corey Lewandowski now have, as you noted, tens of billions of dollars to enact this agenda. But there are some serious concerns within the Trump White House if these are the dynamic duo to do this, what is considered probably the most important policy agenda of the Trump White House.
I'm curious, watching this from afar, at least from my perspective, and I wrote about this at length today in Tangle, I feel pretty alarmed, I would say. I was kind of in a wait and see mode for the first 8 or 9 months of the presidency and of Trump's presidency. And now I'm just feeling like every day there's this new sort of Overton window being obliterated. I'm curious, in your reporting, given how well sourced you are in Washington, D.C., there always seems to be a difference between what Republicans are saying publicly and what they're saying privately. And I'm saying with Democrats, not just Republicans, but specific to Trump, there does seem to be this incredible effect of nobody will say a bad thing about him publicly. I'm wondering, on this issue specifically, the deportation agenda, this really vast extension of executive power, what are Republicans saying to you behind closed doors? Is it meaningfully different than what they're saying publicly? Is there actually any worry or concern about it?
So in 2017, it was almost farcical what the gap between what Republicans would say privately about Donald Trump, usually something along the lines of "this guy's crazy," and then what they would say publicly, which is he was the bestest president ever. But I would say now, in the second term, the Republican Party is much more aligned with the Trump vision. You don't actually see nearly as much private dissent, especially on an issue like immigration, where basically single-handedly Donald Trump, by sensing an opportunity where voters already were, but where elite Republican opinion was not, has completely transformed the Republican Party. Now, there are some issues in terms of executive overreach where you are seeing even public dissent. I think there have been some wariness about these strikes on boats in the Caribbean, attacking, basically military strikes on boats where the administration claims that they're quote unquote narco-terrorists, but then also not providing, evidence publicly about that. So there definitely are and I think also some Republicans, it's not just that they're worried about what Trump's doing. I think some Republicans are worried that next time Democrats get in power, Trump has moved the Overton window so much that the next Democratic president is also going to be able to take advantage of those new executive powers.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of other areas where there has been some dissent, I mean, what about when the tariffs were happening back in April, I guess it was?
And that feels like 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not just, I mean, it is, April does feel like 20 years, but like that, and that discontent is growing. I mean, the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, comes from South Dakota. Those soybean farmers out there, China has not allowed any imports of soybeans the entire year. They are now having to use the income from the tariffs to bail out farmers that are suffering from it. So you're absolutely right. There is like a growing discontent among some Republicans on tariffs.
It's really interesting because there's a connection to something that I think is going to be a liability for Trump and the Republicans. And it's the fact that we're now bailing out Argentina to the tune of $40 billion. Argentina has made deals with China to export their soybeans to China. So imagine what that communicates to the farmers, right? The soybean farmers who have been totally screwed over by these tariffs. And now, on top of that, you have the United States government bailing out Argentina, not because we necessarily care about Argentina, but because there's a ton of U.S. business interests and investment in Argentina. So essentially, the Trump administration is bailing out U.S. investors and his corporate buddies.
Yeah, it's one thing to have the party fall in line in the way that you described. I think the fact that there is so little ideological coherence within the kind of Trump program, it creates so many pitfalls for him. He finds himself advocating for policies that are completely disconnected from anything that would have been described as conservative before. I mean, nationalizing companies to large and small degrees is kind of comes out of nowhere and becomes something that is all of a sudden, like I've done it 4 or 5 times, even the boats in Venezuela. It's one thing to step up drug interdiction. It is another thing entirely to adopt a policy of summary execution for suspicious boats moving through the Caribbean. That is astonishing.
And the Trump administration isn't really hiding the ball. It's not really about narco-terrorism. They want regime change in Venezuela. They're pretty clear about it, if you're paying attention to statements coming out of the White House. And that goes right back to the issue of immigration, if you ask me, because typically when the U.S. gets involved in these regime change wars, you never really know how it's going to end up. And typically it'll destabilize the country that we're doing this regime change war in. That could lead to another refugee crisis. Where are the refugees going to go? You know, it's just...
I guess, let me put this to you. I mean, what if hypothetically speaking, I happen to believe this is actually the case in Venezuela, but even if it was just hypothetical, there was a leader who was there who's a legitimate authoritarian leader who's stealing elections, and there's a populist uprising of people crying out to the world for help, trying to rid themselves of this person. We're the big guys on the block. Is it a bad thing for us to thumb the scale? I mean, like...
Yes.
Make the case.
We need to thumb the scale here in the U.S. Okay, enough with the regime changes, enough with meddling in other countries and what they're up to. Look, my heart breaks for what's happening in Venezuela, and I am not a fan of the leadership in Venezuela at all. However, there are all sorts of countries that are suffering under dictatorial regimes, authoritarian regimes. I don't think that it is our place, especially right now, given the fact that we're $37 trillion in debt and it's only rising, to get involved and meddle in the leadership or the governments of other countries.
Well, I will articulate what Trump advisors that I've talked to. I'll articulate their theory of the case here, which is that in some ways they see it as Donald Trump's own version of something called the Monroe Doctrine, which used to basically say Europeans, you have to stay out of the Americas. In this way, some people internally call it the Donroe doctrine. Workshopping, I think. And essentially, the argument is that America got way too out over its skis by going to the Middle East, by other places, but the Americas is sort of the United States' sphere of influence. And everything also that it happens in Venezuela does affect the United States. A lot, you just talked about migration earlier. There were a lot of those immigrants that came over, especially during Biden, were from Venezuela. The political turmoil inside Venezuela did have effects in America. And so in a way that wasn't necessarily the case with Iraq and Afghanistan, they would argue, America actually has a vested interest in trying to create a more stable Venezuela than it is right now.
Well, one of the things that could have been done is maybe we take our thumb off the scale when it comes to things like economic sanctions against Venezuela because we don't like their leader, right? Economic sanctions don't work. Just ask Russia, right? Russia's doing great, actually. And so in the case of Russia, it worked out. But in the case of Venezuela, it did cause a lot of economic harm to ordinary people who just decided, yeah, we got to get the hell out of here, and did come to the United States in large numbers. I don't think that regime changes usually end up the way that we expect, right? It creates a vacuum oftentimes. Usually a bad actor fills that vacuum, and it creates an unstable situation on the ground. I just don't think it's our place to do it, but I also understand that we do have refugee crises. The question is, what can we do to make the situation better on the ground in those countries? Is there something we're currently doing that maybe we need to pull back from to make the situation better on the ground in those countries? Rather than exhausting all those other options, we immediately go toward the military option. And I don't think the military option is going to bode well for us in the long run, or Venezuela, to be honest.
All right, I want to get to some of the stuff that's a little bit more local here, reel it back into California a tiny bit. Amid all this stuff that's been happening around immigration, National Guard troop deployments, there is a new front in the gerrymandering redistricting war. Here in California, Prop 50 is going to be on the ballot. Gavin Newsom obviously is embracing the redistricting fight. That's happening in less than 2 weeks, actually. Effectively, I think we've sort of gotten to a mass off point for both sides. I'm curious, and I'll start with you, Kmele, actually. The effort from Donald Trump and Gavin Newsom is obviously plainly partisan. They're not hiding their intentions. I'm curious if you think this is a productive response from the governor here in California, if it's reasonable for him to take a lay of the land and say, they're going to fight dirty, we're going to fight dirty back, or if you think this is a scenario where someone like Gavin Newsom, the Democratic Party, should kind of try and take the high road if, you're in my shoes, which is being pretty opposed to gerrymandering.
Yeah, look, it's certainly defensible. The California and the Democrats broadly look at the circumstance. Donald Trump, essentially in October, I believe it was, is calling publicly, commending Texas for redistricting in a very partisan way, encouraging other Republican states to do exactly the same thing. Democrats are looking at this and saying, well, what are we going to do? And Democrats in California come up with a scheme. I said scam. I didn't mean
Freudian.
That wasn't a Freudian slip. Or maybe it was. And this scheme is to do some of their own partisan redistricting. I think the sad part about this, honestly, is that California, having already gone the step of actually implementing a more independent system that made redistricting less political just barely 15 years ago, that was kind of a star in its crown. It was something that I think all Californians could be very proud of. It was a step in the right direction, imperfectly implemented, of course, but definitely something that perhaps could have been a model for national reform. And you abandon it because of political convenience. Even if it is a legitimate concern, it does seem that kind of vacating that principle is a problem. And I don't know how this works out. I mean, we already see New York and a couple of other states having open conversations about this. It may be a little harder for them to pull this off, but it does feel like a step backwards. And to the extent we are able to find an off-ramp, the off-ramp ideally would be Californians say, we don't want to do things this way. What we actually want is a more moderate, rational politics. We want systems and institutions that are generally regarded as fair, even by the Republican kind of conservative minority here in California. I think that is a better way to do things than this kind of tit-for-tat, retaliatory redistricting approach that's been adopted, even though I know a lot of mainstream Democrats are behind this. Barack Obama has endorsed the policy and thinks it's kind of a novel approach, but there isn't anything particularly novel about it. I do think it's a step backwards.
I mean, just to add to your point, I mean, this is a bipartisan race to the bottom here. And, Democrats want to say, well, Donald Trump, drew first blood with the Texas orientation. And let's be clear, Donald Trump is doing this in part because he believes, with some good reason, that if Democrats take back the House, he's going to be impeached for a third time. And he does not want that. And so that is part of the rationale here. Now, that is, Texas is not the first one. If you want to go and look at Illinois and their congressional maps, and it is the craziest jigsaw puzzle you have ever seen in order to basically make it so Democrats have all but I think 3 seats. So, but the upshot of having all of this is that you are going to have fewer moderate members. You are in swing seats. So several Republicans in California are probably going to, if and when this thing does pass, they're going to lose their seats, and that means you would just have fewer moderate members, and that means you have more members where their first political priority is avoiding a primary challenge from the left or to the right, which means you are going to actually see added partisanship as these maps change. Mm-hmm.
I can't agree with that more, to be honest with you, because yes, when you have single party rule in a state, the politics gets super corrupt. You don't have challenge from an opposing side. I think that, look, it doesn't matter where you land on the political spectrum. It is good for your party, your preferred party, to constantly feel the pressure, right? To feel the competition. When there's no competition, that creates an incredibly corrupt system. And I think we already have that in California, to be honest with you, right? The Democratic Party, since they don't feel much competition, I think what you have in these elections, in these districts in particular, is they try to out-left each other or out-Democrat each other. Yeah. And the purity politics starts playing a role, who's the most pure in their left-wing ideology. And I think that's a race to the bottom when it comes to the people living in a state that's been gerrymandered to the point where you have single-party rule. I want Democrats to feel pressure and a challenge from the opposing side. And right now in California, we don't have that. And look, there's also just who I am in terms of my character. Losers lose, and manufacturing a situation in which a loser wins is loser shit. Okay? So yeah, all right, Republicans want to do it. I understand wanting to respond to it to kind of even the playing field, I guess, to some extent. But I just look at Trump and think to myself, sure, he might be worried about the House leaning in the direction of the Democratic Party controlling it, and then maybe there might be more impeachments, which would annoy the crap out of me too, because let's stop wasting our time and actually focus on policies to improve people's lives. But I think at the heart of what's motivating Trump is, I don't think my policies and I don't think my presidency is going to help Republicans keep control of the House. So I have to cheat. I have to pressure these Republican states to cheat on my behalf. And that's that is so embarrassing. It really is. And it's embarrassing that we have an electorate that cheers it on when you should be looking at your leaders and asking yourselves, why am I supporting a guy who needs to cheat to win? That's how I see it personally. And one other thing I'll say, I love California, I love this country, and I do not want to disenfranchise any voters, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. So there are Republican voters in this state, they're already disenfranchised. Disenfranchising them more is not a good look at all.
All right. I can't believe, given everything I've written about this issue, you're going to make me defend gerrymandering for a second, but I have to do this. I mean, first of all, I think a means to an end is a reasonable argument here. I mean, the counter case is, okay, Gavin Newsom does nothing. Democratic
I
governors.
mean, that's what he's good at, by the way.
We're going to get to that. Democratic governors across
Well, other than looking
the
out for
country.
his, utility donors and all of that. We can get to
Don't
that.
antagonize her. We're going to be patient. Okay,
I can talk about Newsom all night.
Democratic governors across the country do nothing, and they say we're going to take that. They make the argument you guys just articulated. It's a race to the bottom, and then Trump gerrymanders Texas, and they gerrymander Virginia or wherever else they're going to go next. And they pick up 20 or 30 more House seats, and then the 2026 midterms roll around, and Democrats have a 5%, population advantage and popular vote advantage, and they lose the House, which is supposed to be representative of the country. And then we get 2 more years of unchecked Trump power, which for me, my personal opinion, is a scary thought. I think the 9 months of unchecked Trump power has been a little scary to me personally. So, how is that the solution to just say the guy who's articulating the race to the bottom, who's encouraging the race to the bottom, we're just going to say, all right, screw it, we'll let him have it. I mean, I don't buy that at all. That doesn't feel like a good argument.
To your point, everything that Newsom is doing is completely both politically rational for his own purposes and rational from the point of view of the Democratic Party. In the same way, arguably, like Trump doing it, in Texas and Indiana and all these other states, it's also politically rational. But it can also be it can also be true that in the end, it is a race to the bottom. It doesn't mean that you unilaterally disarm if you're the Democratic Party, though, which I think is your point.
Well, I'm just saying, if you want the unilateral disarm, I think a much more realistic case for the unilateral disarm or the off-ramp is that Democrats fight back. They gerrymander so badly that everybody's unhappy. They get control of the House. And then in 2 years, we're sitting here and everybody's like, wow, this sucks. And then we sort of pull back from the brink. To me, that is a far more realistic path to the off-ramp than just saying, we'll give Trump 2 more years of unchecked power when he's saying exactly what he's going to do with that unchecked power, which is give himself the most unfair advantage possible.
I hate to admit this because I hate the legislative filibuster in the Senate, but I think the only real check on Trump's power is the legislative filibuster. It just is. Because, when you think about the first Trump term, when Democrats took control of Congress in the second half of his first term, what did they do to hold him accountable? What did they do to challenge his power? All they did was engage in activity that essentially strengthened the support behind him and made him out to be some sort of victim because of the impeachments, right? Which, by the way, I was supportive of as they were happening. But I didn't really consider the blowback to the impeachments. What other way did the Democrats effectively fight back against Trump in his first term?
I think they ground Congress to a halt for the second half of his first term in a lot of ways. He didn't do much legislatively. He had the 2017
not now
tax
either.
cuts.
That's what I was going to say. Congress doesn't do much legislatively anyway. We're all talking about this as if it's an existential issue. And Congress has ceded so much power to the executive branch in recent decades. They do nothing other than, engage in this whole theater about the government funding bill every year. I want to pull my hair out. And then, if they ever pass legislation, it's usually a tax cut bill. Especially under Trump. That's what he did in his first term. It's what he just accomplished in his second term. So I just think Congress overall is so dysfunctional and has willingly ceded power to the executive branch, beginning with George W. Bush's administration.
So much of you had a great piece that was published today in Tangle, and I'm sure most of you read it, right? Yes? It's quite good. In that piece, in many respects, I think you're arguing for norms. And this is something that, honestly, I was perhaps a little less concerned about in 2016. I imagined that some of the craziness I anticipated with Trump's election might actually snap back, create that snapback and get us to some sort of moderation. We didn't really like that. Maybe we'll have a less super empowered executive. Didn't anticipate COVID happening, didn't anticipate the circumstance that might create for a second, for the president who followed Donald Trump to essentially further empower the executive, which would only further empower Trump 2.0 when we got him again. Certainly didn't anticipate all of that. But I do think that this is an opportunity with this particular issue around gerrymandering to actually focus on principle and to choose principle over this kind of pragmatic political partisan advantage that, again, I think I agree with you. That Congress isn't doing all of that much at the moment anyways, and it isn't clear that rhetorically that you could not make the argument that, look, this does signal weakness on the part of the Trump administration. If your policies are any good, you should stand and fight for them on that basis. Pay close attention to every governor in every state who is looking to kind of cheat in this way, to disenfranchise their local voters. They don't trust you. They don't believe that they can win elections fairly. They don't have good ideas. I think that is a really strong case, and I actually think that that is what matters most here in certain respects. It's not about the short-term gain with respect to just kind of partisanship in the House and in the Senate. I do think at the moment we are fighting on the base mostly for values, for norms, for these kind of basic philosophical ideals that have to be advanced and protected and safeguarded.
All right, I actually didn't know this before we got here tonight, and I was chatting with everybody backstage, but all three of you have pretty deep California ties. Camille lives here, Anna's been here her whole life. Alex, I found out when we were chatting backstage, grew up here. His mom's actually here, so hi, Alex's mom. My understanding from chatting with all you guys is that you both care a lot about this state, and you have a pretty deep understanding of the politics here. With that, I do want to talk a little bit about the man at the forefront of this gerrymandering war, which is Gavin Newsom.
Don't boo me, okay?
And Alex,
nice.
I want to start with you. You've reported extensively on both Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris's political ambitions for 2028. So I have a two-part question for you, and you're not going to be like a politician. You're going to answer both of them. The first one is, what are you hearing about Gavin's plans for 2028, and is it as obvious as it looks?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And then the second one is who you expect from the Democratic Party to kind of throw their hat in the ring. You know, what are the whispers behind closed doors that people are giving you?
So the first thing you have to understand about Gavin Newsom is that he was essentially running a shadow campaign in 2023 and 2024, just in case Biden would falter. If you go back, he launched
that didn't happen at all.
But it did, but it happened too late. You know, and you could, if you go back, you could see that he was going through, he was seeing his presidential ambitions flash before his eyes once Kamala Harris took over. Because then, if she serves, if she wins, then that's 4 years, 8 years. He's lost his window. So that's part of the reason why after Trump won, he was first out the gate, ready to go, because he had essentially been running, for 24 months at that point. An interesting thing about him and Kamala Harris is that they both won their first races on the same day in 2003 in San Francisco. She won the DA's race. He became mayor of San Francisco. And the week after they won, Gavin Newsom's then wife, Kimberly Guilfoyle, who then eventually became Donald Trump Jr.'s fiance, is now going to be our ambassador to Greece. Long story there. But she went on the record and trashed Kamala Harris. A week after, accused Kamala Harris of essentially intentionally sabotaging her career, all these things. So these two have basically been a little bit messy for decades now, and have always sort of circled each other warily. They share a lot of former staff. In fact, actually a lot of Kamala's staff now are working for Gavin, are expected to guide his campaign. But they both avoided challenging each other directly. You know, he would run for governor, she would run for Senate, et cetera. But this is the first time in those multi-decades where they actually could face off against each other. And there's a lot of just like drama and human backstory there, which is really interesting. Now, get out of California, you know, the candidates sort of go into a bunch of different buckets. So there's like all the governors, right, that are running against Washington. We can get stuff done. You have people like Governor Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, Governor Wes Moore in Maryland, Governor Andy Beshear in Kentucky, J.B. Pritzker in Illinois, and then obviously Gavin Newsom in California. You have some of the D.C. people that like Cory Booker, that want to run again. You have sort of the left wing, which would be like Representative Ro Khanna from up in Northern California, also Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which would inherit some of the Bernie movement. And then, you know, and it really is like a free-for-all, and the level of dissatisfaction among Democratic voters with the Democratic Party means there's also a lot of kindling there for someone to just, you know, run a very insurgent outsider campaign.
And I'm curious to hear your view, not your personal views about Gavin, we'll get there, but your view on how the Democratic base might embrace him. I mean, let's imagine a hypothetical world where he's one of the top, you know, contenders for the Democratic primary. Mm-hmm. Do you think that he's the kind of candidate that would connect with the Democratic base? And, you know, what have you experienced, and this you can opine on, you know, as a Californian resident and someone who I think probably votes Democrat sometimes, like, how do you think he's going to navigate where the party is right now?
Well, I mean, he's been kind of navigating it publicly, openly, and there's a lot of A/B testing going on with Gavin Newsom, which I found fascinating, right? So right out of the gate, to your point, he does this podcast episode with Charlie Kirk, and suddenly, you know, the guy that was like willing to really penalize parents for not going along with everything their kids want if they identify as transgender, for instance, is now saying like, oh yeah, totally. Having trans girls compete against biological girls in, you know, girls' sports is very unfair. He got a lot of backlash for saying that because it was such a 180 from what we had heard from Gavin Newsom previously. Look, the problem with Gavin Newsom is, for people who are paying close attention, you can see that he doesn't really have deeply held values or principles. He's a politician, and he's going to do and say whatever is necessary to win. As a result, I think it is very likely that he will be a formidable opponent in the Democratic primary. There's no question about that. That's why I feel that it is my role and my job to inform people to the best of my ability that this is not an empty suit. This is a man who has a political record that's been disastrous, and people should know about it. People should know about the fact that he squandered $24 billion in California taxpayer money to help the homeless. Well, that money got funneled to all these nonprofits that are run by buddies of Democratic politicians. They fattened their pockets. They didn't do anything for the homeless. Right now, our state, California, owes the federal government $20 billion because of how they mismanaged unemployment funds. I'm sorry, this guy has been a complete and utter disaster for the state of California. Now, the question is, are Democratic voters nationwide going to be aware of these things? I doubt it. The media does a pretty bad job in covering these things in a nuanced and detailed way. But in terms of like his demeanor, how good he is at retail politics, yeah, I think he's got a good shot.
I mean, I will say, you know, I hear you say those things, and it's like, it feels to me as if there are a lot of weaknesses that he has, and the California record is going to get punched a bunch.
And it should.
At the same time, I've seen him defend his record and defend the Democratic Party's record and defend Joe Biden. I mean, you know, famously with Sean Hannity, he went on Fox News, and look, I disagree with a lot of the things Gavin Newsom says, but he was pretty damn compelling. And there is something about this moment and this era of politics where I think if you can walk into a show an away game like Fox News and mop the floor with the host, who's typically pretty good at pinning his opponents in this like political arena we're all playing in. That's really, really valuable. And I think he is going to be really formidable. I think if I were like a betting odds favorite, he would probably be at the top of my list right now, just because of how good he is at defending the California record.
Real quick, I'm sorry, I just got to say one other thing. I mean, I also saw him debate Ron
DeSantis.
Thank you, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. And I guess it's all subjective, right? And I do, to be honest, I want to be fair and open about my views. I do have a serious bias against Gavin Newsom. But even with that in mind, I thought that he did poorly in that debate because he's a target-rich environment, okay? I mean, right now, California is either the top state with the highest unemployment rate or the second with the highest unemployment rate. Our unemployment rate is insanely high when you consider something known as the U6 measure, which also takes into account people who are severely underemployed, like working an hour a week, if that. That number jumps up to like 20%. I mean, it's really bad in this state. So he's going to have to find a good enough argument to defend his record on that, because it is true that we have lost a lot of people who just decided, I can't really make ends meet in this state, I'm leaving. We've had a severe housing shortage in this state that hasn't been dealt with adequately. People in this state are either doing really well or they're living in severe poverty. And so all of that is going to be, uncovered, revealed during the election, and he needs to have some serious answers to that. He needs to answer for the fact that 3/4 of Californians voted in favor of Prop 36, and Homeboy still doesn't want to adequately fund that proposition. So so he essentially fulfills the will of Californian voters. It's just, I've seen too many things from this governor that will make him vulnerable in the primary. Now, the question is, will there be other Democratic candidates who are formidable? I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. I don't know the records of all the other governors that we're talking about here.
I mean, but to your point, just let's go away from like the policy stuff. I mean, he is a tremendous political athlete. I think that's just true. I think, one thing that I think as a communicator that makes him a little bit interesting in this era is, Gavin Newsom has a lot of trouble. He's dyslexic. He has a lot of trouble reading. And he's always had a lot of trouble reading. And he hates giving speeches off a teleprompter. And when he's going through a binder, it takes him like a long time and he needs like a lot of silence. And I say this because in this sort of communications environment, you need to be really agile on your feet, and you need to have things at the tip of your fingers and just running in your head. And he has that more than I have seen most politicians, certainly more than like Kamala Harris, who requires lots and lots of prep. But he has that that ability, and he senses, for all of his flaws, he sniffs out political moments to sort of emerge. And that's why you've seen, if you'd asked anyone like 10 months ago, what are Gavin Newsom's chances, they would be a lot lower than they are right now after the last 10 months.
Kmele, thoughts on the Gavin Newsom experience as a resident Californian?
The Gavin Newsom experience.
You overstated the depth of my relationship with California. I do live here now. Over the last 5 years, I lived here, I left, and then I came back, and I may leave again. At the moment, I am splitting my time between California and New York, which is painful, flying almost weekly, so weep for me. But in addition, as I'm thinking about it, California is sufficiently beautiful and remarkable, just singular as a state in terms of just the endowment of natural beauty, the ability to kind of be outside all the time, the preposterously good weather. You've got this concentration of companies here that are not just like the most important companies in America, they're the most important companies in the world. And somehow in California, you also managed to run some of those companies out because of weird political drama. I don't know how you managed to do that. And there's so much dysfunction here. And most of it does seem governmentally related, that it is kind of hard to actually understand. I could imagine myself living here forever, like retiring here, but for the political circumstances. So it is very weird to have these nationally recognized political figures like Gavin Newsom, like Kamala Harris, who have this association with California, like essentially being prominent because they're from California. California, and LA in particular, New York City in particular, play this outsized role in our politics. They do that despite the fact that they tend to be these just basket cases politically. And I honestly don't understand it. That is the end of my soliloquy.
You just reminded me of something that makes me want to confront Alex with. I think it was last year, everything is a blur, it might have been the year before, but Xi Jinping was going to visit San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And ahead of that visit, Gavin Newsom decided, I'm going to clean up San Francisco, right? Mm-hmm. And Californians were livid about it, not because they didn't want to clean up San Francisco, don't get me wrong, but it was because people had been complaining about what was transpiring on the streets of San Francisco for years at that point. And so Gavin Newsom holds a press conference. I want to know if this is like the magic of Gavin Newsom, what you think about this. And he was like, people are accusing me of cleaning up San Francisco only because Xi Jinping is going to come visit. And you know what? That's true. That's true. Is that politically savvy? That made me want to lose my mind.
Sounds Trumpian, actually.
But why do we want that abuse? I don't understand why American voters respond to that kind of abusive garbage. No, I'm not going to do anything for you, but we're going to have the leader of China visit, so I'm going to clean things up for him. That's not okay.
I mean, that may not resonate. What has been interesting to see is that he, I think in his mind, he saw an opportunity with international stage to say, hey, I'm not running San Francisco anymore, but when I was called in, I was able to clean up San Francisco. That's, I think, how they were thinking about it politically. Mm-hmm. I'd also say what you've seen him do over the last year is he has tried to remind everybody that he was the pro developer, San Francisco mayor, sort of the more business friendly. He's sort of embraced the quote unquote abundance movement that, became popular this year. And he's rolled back some housing laws at the same time. So you're seeing him try to, with the Charlie Kirk thing in particular too, you've seen him moderate on some issues while at the same time trying to get lefty bona fides by being the ultimate Trump fighter and try to sort of create a coalition on the left that will try to avoid being labeled San Francisco liberal in a general election. It might not work because to your point, I think some people look at Gavin Newsom just anecdotally and think it's a little too good to be true.
Yeah, and look, I think that what's key for Democrats is to really start thinking about moderating some of their social views, to be honest.
But that's you gave an example of what Gavin's doing.
I know, but it came across as so fake, right? Because it was oh yeah, it's totally unfair. Okay, are you going to do anything about it? Are you going to change any of the laws that you championed on this issue? No. So it came across as inauthentic. You get what I'm saying? But if you are a Democratic candidate who's actually authentically moderate on some of these social issues, I'm not saying right wing, I'm not saying conservative, but actually consider the fairness of some of these policies and whether or not you're going too far or whether or not you're encroaching on parents' rights on some of these issues, right? I think that's important. I think a lot of parents in California were frustrated with the state legislature and some of the policies that they were implementing that essentially took some of their agency away from how they parent their own children. That kind of stuff offends people. So I think Democrats need to be considerate about that as they move forward. I just don't be so wrapped up in the activist class of the Democratic Party. I think that they had way too much sway in past elections and policies.
You're cornering me here again a bit, but I'll make the case, I think. First of all, executive experience to me is something that should be valued. I think if I'm Gavin Newsom, my message is, I run a state that has the 5th largest economy in the world. I fought back against Trump, actually. I mean, I've tried to stand up to him on the National Guard troop deployments, whatever, but he's also doing the thing that I think a lot of Democrats pine for, which is like the social media stuff, where he's doing
He has been
all
winning with
caps,
that.
Yeah, like the
I can
all
be fair.
caps Trump in,
the censored Trump neck thing.
Yeah.
That was good. That was good.
Yeah,
I like that.
But he's sort of fighting back. He's getting in the mud. He's doing that. I know Kmele might hate this, despite being like a Tesla driver, but he leads the way on the climate change battle in a lot of ways. I mean, California does fight back in a regulatory way by sort of saying like, we're not going to do the thing that when the federal government under the Trump administration is rolling back all these climate change policies, we're not going to do that. We're going to be a home for immigrants where they're safe here. And like, to me, that stuff is appealing to the Democratic base. And for all the mess and the different, dysfunction you can talk about California, this is a massive state with tens of millions of people in it. More Republicans live here than most southern, ruby red states. It's like incredibly diverse in terms of the geography, the people, the politics, the needs. I mean, it's not like it's an easy job. This is like a pretty rowdy place to have to wrangle, in my view. And I think like he could get out in front of the American people and make that case, which is like, me and Ari, Tangle's managing editor, we're talking about this. I'm an East Coast guy, so I lived in New York for many years, and I love hating on LA. I'm sorry, it's just it's part of it. You guys do it to us, we do it back.
We're in Orange County. You're fine.
Yeah. I don't want no Orange County erasure. I know we're not in LA, but then you get out. It's like I want to hate this place, and then I get here, and like it is singularly beautiful.
Yes.
The people are awesome. The food's great. It's like you feel it. And, it's like I live in Philadelphia and I hear the way conservatives talk about Philadelphia sometimes, like it's a total war zone and the whole city's on fire. And then you go there and it's normal. And I think like in a lot of ways, some ways it's abnormal. But like I think Newsom can make that case of just like the things you've been told about California and the dysfunction and how horrible it is are lies. Come here and visit. And some people might hear that and be receptive to it. And I think the Democratic base for sure would appreciate who he is in terms of how he stood up to this administration, which so many in the Democratic base find abhorrent, basically.
Yeah, look, there's a distinction between politics and policy. I love policy, so I dig in and I dig into every minor detail of policy because that's what effectively impacts our lives day to day. He's gonna probably win the Democratic primary because he's good at politics. He's got the slick back hair. He looks to some like he might be attractive. I don't know. But in terms,
even I can admit the man is attractive. Yeah. He's objectively attractive.
He's not my type, but it's all right. That doesn't matter. But he's presentable. That's the point. He looks like a politician.
Yes.
And he's a great used car salesman. Like, he's going to do great. He's going to do great. So for the Gavin Newsom lovers in the audience, don't worry. I think he's going to do great. But I am worried because if he ends up winning as the next president and he's an ineffective Democratic leader, that is going to lead to blowback, the likes of which you have never seen before. Because I have personally experienced what his leadership looks like, and I have seen my quality of life diminished under his leadership. And so if Americans overall experience the same thing, I am worried about what that means for the future of the Democratic Party.
Can I just say my dad was a used car salesman, and
but I dated one for like 7 years. There's nothing wrong with used car salesmen unless they're Gavin Newsom.
Well, he did sell my mom a lemon, and she had to keep coming back to the store, which is how he met her. So
nice.
Great story. All right, really quick. Lightning round. I just want to. I know I hate to put you guys on the spot, and I do tend to look down on political prognostication, but Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, or the field as Democratic nominee in 2028?
The field, and I'll go even more specific.
Oh, all right. I wasn't expecting this from you.
Again, this is like, it's a BS prediction, but I'll just tell you, like, my BS prediction right now. I wouldn't count out AOC. I think Bernie...
Wow.
Bernie got closer than people expected in 16. He got pretty close in 20, and a lot of those people, young people that voted in both those primaries, they're older. And if you just saw what happened in New York, there's still a lot of young people that feel disillusioned with the political system. And I'm not saying she would necessarily win, but I would not underestimate her.
Hannah?
I know this isn't the question, but since you brought up AOC, I think she's eyeing a Senate seat, but I could be wrong. We'll see.
Her team is giving herself maximum optionality to decide which of the two she wants to do.
I mean, that could definitely make the primary a lot more interesting. I don't know. I hate doing these prediction games. I don't know. You mentioned Ro Khanna earlier. Out of all the Democrats I'm hearing from lately, Ro Khanna appeals to me personally the most because I think he's the closest thing to someone who focuses on the bread and butter issues and is a lot more moderate when it comes to some of those social issues. So yeah, I hope he considers. I think he'd be an interesting candidate in the primary.
Can I totally disregard the prompt and ask Anna a quick question?
I mean, this is why I don't like you, but yeah,
I do this regularly. I'm sorry. Watching AOC and Bernie sit next to each other in that CNN town hall, which was a bizarre thing. There's not an election coming up. There's just CNN, hey, come over for a town hall. Anyways, the contrast between her and Bernie on the social issues in particular was stark.
Definitely, yeah.
What do you make of that?
What was the contrast?
She is very much the kind of Democrat that Anna is criticizing. She was, I think, the kind of avatar for some of the worst ideas that manifested themselves and kind of rose to the surface during 2020. I'm sure some of you are very excited about them, but I say worst in the sense that now they are politically toxic. Defund the police, etc. She was championing that stuff, and in some respects still seems to unapologetically support those policies.
Yeah.
Well, but she has moderated in seeming ways. One part of that town hall that was notable is, you saw most of the Democrats running for president in 2019 who supported a Medicare for All proposal. They said that undocumented immigrants should be covered. She was asked about that at that town hall and did not give a definitive answer, which I thought was signaled some ambitions and maybe potential moderation on some of those issues you're talking about.
I think that it is a misconception that Bernie and AOC are the same. And I'm really happy you brought up the distinction because I think the distinction is important. I think that Bernie was a weaker candidate in 2020 because the activists got in his head. In 2016, he was the type of candidate who appealed to a broad base because he stayed away from some of the toxic, divisive identity politics stuff. But then, his stage got crashed by BLM protesters who, for whatever reason, made him out to be some sort of demon. And he learned the wrong lessons from that, if you ask me.
Well, just one thing to add on to that, Bernie Sanders, throughout his career, had basically been a hawk on immigration, in part because he was so close with unions. He used to say that big businesses in Wall Street wanted to bring in lots of undocumented labor.
Koch brothers.
It was like open borders with the Koch brothers proposal. That's what he said in 2015. And you think back and, would the Democratic Party have been better off had they had Bernie Sanders' view on immigration from 2015 if they had continued having that? Politically, I think it's hard to argue they wouldn't be.
I agree with you, yeah.
All right, we've got about 20 minutes left, so we're going to pivot into some of your guys' questions, some audience Q&A. I think Will might have some cards for me, and I've got a couple that got submitted here beforehand. I have no idea what's on here. All right, I want to start with one that came in before the show because I think it's really important. Actually, before we do this, a quick round of applause for our panelists, please. All right, this question is from Lori. She said, now that extreme gerrymandering has or is becoming the norm, do you think anything can be done or undone to make moderate candidates a viable option? And do independent candidates draw more from the Republican or Democratic base? So kind of two questions there. How do we get moderate candidates in office amid the gerrymandering scourge? And are independent candidates drawing more from the Republican or Democratic base right now?
I mean, these things go in cycles. I mean, gerrymandering is not new. We have had periods of really intense gerrymandering, and usually the thing that changes it is, essentially one party breaks through, and or there's such a level of political corruption because stuff you were talking about earlier, where you have one party rule in all of these places that eventually become corrupt, and then reform-driven movements eventually, like the progressive movement in the early 20th century, sort of break through. So I guess this is all to say is short-term pessimism and long-term optimism.
Any thoughts?
I have nothing to add to that. I agree.
All right, next question, and this one came in from out in the lobby when people submitted some questions on their way in. Given the constant political flood of breaking stories, how do you decide which issue requires sustained attention? It's a good question.
Good question for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, at Tangle, I would say we like to follow the lead of the punditry class a little bit, which isn't always my favorite when we see that there are debates that are kind of dominating the conversation and it feels like there's real dividing lines. It's like, if something happens, Josh Shapiro came up, there was arson committed at the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania, and nobody was really debating whether that was a good or bad thing, so it doesn't feel like a story that we really need to dig into. But when we see the kind of dividing lines, I think it's sort of like a moth to a light a little bit. But I will say, I felt bad, Anna, because I appreciated the point you were making earlier about caring more about policy than politics. I think one thing that we're definitely trying to do more of, especially now that we have more resources, is actually give a lot more attention to the policy issues that aren't dominating the punditry, because there's so much stuff that kind of slides under the radar and falls out of the picture because it's not so interesting and the talking points aren't so simple. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard. It's one of the hardest things to do as a person in the media, is kind of suss out what's important and when it's important and how much attention it should get. And story selection bias is a real bias, I'm fond of saying, if an immigrant comes to the United States illegally and builds a $1 billion tech company, the New York Times is doing a profile on that person 100 times out of 100, and you'll never see them on the homepage of foxnews.com. But if they come here and they get in a drunk driving accident that kills 5 people, they will be on the homepage of Fox News, and the New York Times will not talk about it. And it's just true. That's just how it operates. And so you have to be really careful about which stories you're putting your light on, and kind of do the gut check of whether you're doing this because your audience might like it or whether you're doing it because you think it's important. Anything to add? Thank you to the one person who clapped.
It was 2.5. No, but I agree with, I agree with sort of your diagnosis of, you can see, you see this as sort of in our echo chambers too. And part of this is, part of this is an editorial decision by Fox News, but also I think because of the sort of attention economy dynamics, a lot of times, you can see what your audience responds to, especially with the metrics now. You can see it with your newsletter about what they open and how much time they spend reading it. And so in some ways, the New York Times and Fox News, they're not always making a political decision. They are making an economic decision about what is my audience going to respond to. And in some ways, sort of the mob mentality of sort of audience, they are just giving them what the audience wants.
All right, Anna, I'm going to throw you a 90-mile-per-hour fastball right down the middle, and you can smash it wherever you want.
Okay.
All my reasonable right-of-center friends have left California or plan to soon. How can we reform the state when so many reasonable people have left?
Build more housing, lower taxes.
That's it.
Sounds reasonable, yeah.
Camille, anything to add there? You're a reasonable right-of-center person maybe who's thinking about leaving, it feels like.
It's mostly professional obligations, but certainly what was just described sounds like exactly the kind of combination of policies that I would be looking for if I was hopeful for something to make me stay.
All right, this one is specifically to you, Alex. This is a great question. if you could write an update to your original Sin book based on everything that's happened since its release, what would you include? Perhaps a chapter on the AutoPen.
I think the two things that I'm most interested in, so the AutoPen is a fascinating topic. I wrote a story based on internal White House emails about 2 months ago, which basically showed that the last, I think the whole President AutoPen thing is more of a troll than reality, but it is true that the use of the AutoPen, especially at the very tail end of the presidency, was the oversight and mechanisms and processes were lacking in a way where, especially given the legal consequences of the presidential signature, people inside the Biden White House were raising flags about the ways. Joe Biden gave more people commutations than any other, more commutations than any day in American history, and that was done with the AutoPen. And there were internal deliberations of, was Biden completely aware of all the people that you are commuting? So I do think, and how much is that is age? I think there's still open questions, but it was clear by the end he had limited energy, limited time of the day. The other thing that I'm looking into is the cancer diagnosis. I think, it begs many questions. The fact that they publicly released that information 2 days before our book came out, and they said they just found out about it, and you just find out about stage 5 prostate cancer that has gone to the bones. A lot of doctors, including Zeke Emanuel, who brother of Rahm Emanuel, who was Biden's ambassador to Japan and very prominent doctor, said that it doesn't quite pass the smell test. Was he? I think the questions that we've been asking is, were there any hormonal treatments to sort of control for symptoms while he was president that they sort of hid? Were there things they were doing in order to manage prostate cancer, which you can do for an older man? And those are two of the issues.
All right, this question I'm going to address. Any thoughts on today's announcement that the DOJ will monitor California and New Jersey voter sites in the upcoming election? So I got this push notification from the New York Times while we were backstage before he came out here, and I actually read the first few paragraphs out loud to the room. I would say two things. One is that it's not uncommon for the DOJ to monitor elections. It's something that happens. But this is, it hits on the thing that I wrote about today, which is these individual stories that come up cannot be taken contextless, context-free. You have to take the totality of it. And I think when the context is that President Trump is still making the accusation that the 2020 election was stolen, when the context is that National Guard troops are being deployed across the country, when the context is that, the most prominent Democratic lawyers and lawyers for the party are worried about Trump deploying National Guard troops to swing states in the 2026 midterms, an announcement like this is and should be the kind of thing that makes the hair on the back of your neck go up a little bit. That's my personal view. I say that with a very heavy caveat that this could happen and the DOJ could monitor the elections, whatever that word is. We have to unpack that word. Who knows what that really means? And come away without, leveling any allegations of fraud, or it's just like a quiet thing that happens and nothing really comes of it. And the point is to signal to their own base that they're keeping their eyes on the election. They won't allow voter fraud or anything like that to happen. But yeah, it's to me a little bit unnerving.
Yeah, I would say that unnerving, yes, should be taken very seriously, but this is precisely the moment when you would expect most Democratic governors in the country to respond with, it's a fascist takeover. This is the next stage in the fascist takeover. That kind of hysterical rhetoric, almost certainly not particularly helpful here, except it might be particularly helpful to Donald Trump because it's exactly the kind of scene that he likes to create, or at least thrives in. I think the correct response is, this is very serious. going to have a very serious conversation with the administration. I'm going to engage with them directly, let them know my concerns. I want to be certain to the extent anything like this is happening in our state, it is above board, there's transparency, and every voter has, the confidence to go out and vote for the candidate of their choice without feeling intimidated. That's my job as governor. I want to make that promise to you. Very reasonable, even keeled. That could totally be the response in Illinois. That could totally be the response in California. It's generally not the response that you get. So I don't know if Democrats will take my advice on that. I suspect not, but I would think it would serve them.
All right, this is the last question from the audience. How do you manage your mental health in this environment without wanting to give up? How to stay hopeful? There's a presumption here that we're all doing really poorly up here, which I appreciate.
I don't know. I thought it was sort of optimistic. I was like, I don't really manage it.
Yeah. Any thoughts on this? I have plenty, but I'm curious what you guys think.
I have a very tight-knit group of friends and family that I turn to kind of shut my brain off from what's happening politically. But more importantly, I can't emphasize enough how much being out in nature helps. And I'm sure that applies to anyone, regardless of what you do for a living. Man, this state is beautiful. I love California so much. It's the most beautiful state. It just is. And I love going hiking, spending time with my dog. Just take yourself out of the work situation and see the world as something bigger than what you do for a paycheck.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. Like, mindfulness has been incredibly valuable and helpful. Yes, applause for that. Certainly get outside a lot here in California and focus on the things that matter. Also try to have conversations in a way that matter. I do think that there's something about the energy that we bring to the work that we do. And I know sometimes you can be in situations that get very intense, as we all can. I try to avoid those more these days. Try to ratchet things down, try to have the conversation at a level that is accessible, that I can walk away from feeling good. Even on our podcast, The Fifth Column, we work blue. Like, we have a lot of fun. We had Tubin on this past week, and he's had some interesting times in recent years, and we've had some fun at his expense.
Just for the media illiterate, Jeffrey Tubin is the CNN host who accidentally left his Zoom camera on while he masturbated.
I wasn't going to explain.
Yeah,
I don't know that he actually completed the act, or I don't know what happened.
Camille thought we should have this guy on the podcast.
We've talked about it several. He's still a working contributor. He's writing for the New York Times, doing plenty of other things. And he had lots of interesting things to say. Too arousing sometimes. But we didn't talk about that. We had an interesting conversation. There was one joke cracked about it, and he laughed too. And there is something about an encounter like that where it's not always who do we destroy, who won the argument, who won the debate. In many instances, we evade the debate altogether in service of an actual conversation where I express my point of view, you express your point of view. I know I won't persuade you. I'm not trying to. Hopefully, just having the conversation surfaces something interesting for someone in the audience. And to the extent you can approach the work a bit differently, I think it makes it easier to do the work without losing your mind.
Talk to someone from the other side of the aisle.
Yeah.
Because that's what made me a lot happier, believe it or not. Even though I don't agree with, my political opponents, just sitting down and talking with them and getting to know them as human beings took a lot of the fear that had been instilled in me about the other side. You know what I mean? It got rid of that fear. And it helped me to see all Americans, regardless of what their political beliefs are, as humans, first and foremost. When you see and recognize someone's humanity before their political identity, it makes it a lot easier to cope with the moment that we're currently in.
Yeah, all great answers, and I would just add that you can take a break. I try to tell people that, especially if you're like a heavy-duty news consumer. I observe Shabbat every Friday night to Saturday night by just having a news blackout and getting rid of my phone, not paying attention to what's going on. My team can attest I'm impossible to reach during that time. And it feels really good. And a lot of the times, Saturday night comes around and I don't want to open up my phone and see what's going on. And that's the truth. And yeah, you don't have to be a member of the chosen people in order to participate in something like that. So you're all invited. All right, Alex Thompson, Anna Kasparian, Kmele Foster, thank you guys so much for being here. All right, I've just some quick closing remarks before you guys go. Thank you for being here. I know you've been hanging out for a while. It's been an hour and a half. But we have a tradition in Tangle, for those of you who read the newsletter or listen to the podcast, that we make an effort to kind of end any news story we do with a sort of have a nice day, good news piece. So I want to finish the evening tonight in that spirit. As many of you know, I started this, as Will said, 6 years ago. I started Tangle 6 years ago. And a few months ago, I was looking through my phone for something. I was searching a keyword in my iPhone on my Notes app. And I came across this old note that I'd written to myself in 2020, so about 5 years ago. And the note was a budget. It was a plan for how I was going to pay my rent in New York City with a goal of saving a few $100s a month every month. And so it was this like smorgasbord of work that I was going to do. Point number one was to keep a day job that I had as an editor and a reporter, which was a good starting point. Point two was to freelance a few articles a week for this conservative journal called the Independent Journal Review. And point three was to freelance one article per month for Vox, who many of you might be familiar with, a more left-leaning news outlet, actually. And then point number four was to get 100 paying subscribers to Tangle, this newsletter that I had just started, which would make me $400 a month. And if I was doing all the other things, I could kind of make ends meet and save this money. I was spreading myself across these 4 different publications just for a little bit of breathing room. And the dream for me was like this burgeoning newsletter that I just started on Substack to get 100 people there to pay me a monthly subscription. Today, there are 450,000 subscribers to Tangle, and thank you. Just in this room, there's about 300 people tonight who just came here in Orange County, Irvine, California, to see us live. So this is obviously a good news story for me. I'm no longer a struggling reporter in New York. Instead of looking for journalism work, which I spent a lot of time doing, I'm hiring people for journalism jobs. I'm building the media company that I want to exist in the world. And I want to be abundantly clear, I am incredibly grateful and humbled by this. I count my lucky stars every day. This is truly my dream job, even when it's hard. More important than personal success is the broader implication. When I started Tangle, I did not know whether it would work. In fact, I would say I was deeply skeptical that it would work. I didn't think there was an audience for people that wanted to be made uncomfortable or to be exposed to views they didn't agree with. I didn't think there was an audience that wanted to have their preconceived notions challenged every day. The last 5 years to me have proven that there is. Despite how deeply divided and angry our politics can seem sometimes, even among the partisans, there is this huge and curious, skeptical group of people who want to hear from all sides of an issue. To me, there are a few things more important than that right now for where our country is that there's this massive group of people willing to do this, engage in this way. So to that end, I very rarely get a chance to do this, but I wanted to thank you, the people in this room, not just for supporting Tangle and our work, but for what you represent, which is a group of people still willing to be challenged, to listen, to maybe even change your minds, I hope, regularly. You give me a great deal of hope for this country. You provide an incredible well of inspiration for me and the whole Tangle team, a few members of which are here tonight. So thank you all. We hope to see you again very soon. Don't forget, before you leave, there's merch out in the lobby. Alex's book is for sale. I saw him sign a few copies backstage. If you're in the VIP ticketed section, I'll see you guys in a few minutes. We hope to see you guys wherever this tour takes us next. Thank you so much. Good night.